Good morning. My name is Ibrahim Sani. I am currently attending KSI's Global Business Forum here at Berjaya Times Square Hotel in Kuala Lumpur. We are also giving a focus on Budget 2023, largely because the big three items that is going to be discussed at length is cost of living. Of course, we're looking at inflationary pressures, and most importantly, how can the government increase their revenue for this year and the years to come. I'm going to be having a lot of conversations with some of our guests on the show. So do stay tuned with us on Niaga AWANI, on Astro AWANI at 9:30 in the morning. And of course, as promised, here we are in Berjaya Times Square doing a live transmission. My name is Ibrahim Sani, taking over from my colleague Haris Ashraf Hasnan from Pasar Borong, Selangor. The government has been making a lot of postulations in terms of what they intend to do for this budget. We are waiting for their budget presentation tomorrow at 3 p.m. One thing is for sure, budget deficit is going to be key right now. Maybank Investment Banking Group, for instance, yesterday made an analysis and announced that the budget deficit for this retabling of budget 2023 is going to be lower at 5.0% compared to 5.5% budget last year. So because of this, we're also looking at the revenue sources of the government. The Finance Minister as well as the Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, has said that the issuances of new taxes, especially the much touted and much debated GST tax, is not going to be done, at least in the near term. So how then will the government move forward on this? Here to unpack this and more is my guest, Wan Dazrik, Wan Zulkifli, CEO of Ethis Malaysia. Dazrik, let's talk a little bit more about the sources of revenue for the government. While I would like to talk about the goodies that the budget is going to give, one has to give a lot of focus on revenue. After all, it is the other side of the equation of the budget, and therefore it does bring about that whole conversation of where's the government going to get money? Yeah. Where do you think the government's going to get money?
Yeah, I think to answer your question short, I think most fundamentally will be around the taxes, and you've mentioned it already. I think a lot of speculation even last year around GST and that it's not going to be implemented in the near future. So what that means is that potentially it will come to a point of the distribution, or rather the source of taxes. And I think some have already speculated right, between the T20s, M40s and B40s. Yeah. Most speculate that the taxes or individual taxes for M40s would not rise, and simply because of what you mentioned, the inflation, price of inflation and cost of living. Balancing those out is very tricky. But the T20s, most also speculated that maybe the marginal rise of the tax will come from the T20 group. So it's more, to me, I feel that it is more of a wealth distribution, and it's consistent with what Prime Minister Anwar have mentioned around Malaysia Madani, where he propagate what I consider as a whole society approach. So it's not just for a specific group of people to benefit of certain goodies, incentives and stuff like that, but he tried to propagate the distribution of benefits, goods and wealth across segments of Malaysia, I guess.
Another area of concern is trying to improve on the corporate tax. However, we're looking at this cycle being a bit tough. Corporate Malaysia did suffer during the financial year 2020 and 2021. However, many Malaysian corporates, especially large corporates, have recovered since then. 2023 is going to bring about mixed bag of results. However, if we do talk about taxes for budget 2023, it's going to be impacting the earnings for this year, for corporates making money this year. And of course, we're also looking at the 97% of businesses in this country, which is the SMEs. And if we look at higher corporate tax or business tax, we're looking at lower margins for these businesses. Yeah. How do you think Malaysia is going to remain competitive, considering that this is going to be the situation where we're going to be seeing a lot more taxes coming in from corporates?
In honesty, I think we will be in the situation of we need to do, I guess, periodic revise in terms of our forecasts, our projections, GDP growth and stuff like that. And you've mentioned it. I think there was a downward forecast of 5% now with regards to GDP. I think first and foremost, what would be a key consideration beyond the corporates or MSMEs is actually the livelihood of general Malaysian populations. And I guess that's what the balance that needs to happen between incentives, goodies, and also taxes, right? You're right. There probably be certain implications with regards to business growth. And you've mentioned about 97% of the MSMEs, 97% of the composition of economy, is actually the MSMEs. But I don't think the focus of the Malaysian government now is actually primarily on growth per se, but it's almost the resiliencies that potentially previous government have done, but just to sort of make sure it's robust enough. For the next 3 to 5 years, Malaysian, generally, businesses and the people, first and foremost, can sustain the livelihood. Secondly, make sure the businesses are kind of okay at this point of time, build that rigor, robustness, to steadfast over the next 3 years. Who knows, maybe the next 2-3 years might be a bit more challenging than this year. And we could forecast based on what happens in the West. Might not happen recession, but we have seen, and the signals are clear. I think we've gone into much tighter fiscal deficit, which means it's very, very tricky for the government to balance out, subsidies, and also not to make sure expenditure would actually enable more price hike.
Yeah. I mean, we all know that if the removal of subsidy were to happen, or the slow reduction or gradual reduction of subsidies, price inflation is going to go up, especially on food. We're looking at anywhere between 5 to 9% based on PwC's estimates, as well as Maybank Investment Banking Group estimates, the ones that I've been speaking about with them for the past week or so. And also, let's look at the subsidy bill. In case for those who are unaware, we're looking at Tengku Zafrul, when he was the finance minister, said that subsidy bill came to about 80 billion. This was in September. One would argue that it could go up to 100 billion. When I had Mr. Ponya from PwC, he argues that the subsidy capture was about 60 billion, but 40 plus billion is from fuel. Whatever it is, if we remove subsidies, we're going to see price increase. Considering that this is the case, some of the economists are arguing that we need to give direct cash aid or some form of it. We need to move away from the stigma of the notion of giving direct cash aid. However, if you look at the old ways of doing things, like BRIM, for instance, under the previous prime ministers, 3 prime ministers ago, that was something that was actually being debated and discussed today. Economists are discussing that perhaps this is the more efficient way of ensuring that this is how we manage cost of living. Then there is also the whole notion of EPF. Are we okay to allow for Malaysians to withdraw more from EPF? There's a lot of argument that says no, this is not good. Already EPF is saying, certain percentage. I can't remember the numbers off the cuff, but a large percentage of Malaysians have less than 10,000 ringgit in the EPF. Where do you stand when it comes to cost of living, direct cash aid, EPF withdrawals? I
think it's a tricky one. So if I'm in the government shoes, I would probably look more into the now, as opposed to for the 3 to 5 years, and simply because the resiliencies and robustness I've mentioned earlier, and this is not just for the entities of Malaysia, corporate Malaysia and stuff like that, but more so for the livelihoods of the people. And you've mentioned specifically on, I guess, savings and investments, right? There's always going to be two sides of the coins. I think what would make sense now is actually not so much so about the goodies, the subsidies. I think it works to a certain extent, but I think what could be done better with regards to the target segment that it needs to cater for. We've seen in previous budgets, previous initiatives and stuff like that, it's kind of missed target. The subsidies usually goes to upper tier M40s or T20s. And the ones who really needs the most is actually the B40s or lower tiers M40s. And this is for various reasons, whether it's accessibility, infrastructure and stuff like that. So I think with this, and hopefully it rides on the notion of Malaysia Madani, for example, it can be better targeted to the ones who really needs the most. And you're right, when you spoke about EPF, right? I think a lot of those who takes out the savings and stuff like that is actually from the B40s and M40s. And these are the ones who has lower, I guess, security in terms of long-term savings, pensions and stuff like that. Not necessarily the T20s and the M40s. So these are...
However, I would argue that there would be certain percentages within the M40s might not have that kind of social net. But I get what you're trying to say.
So theoretically, the subsidies need still to be done to a certain extent, but it has to be better targeted. And I think this is a structural problem. I don't think it will be solved this year.
No, of course. No, nobody would argue otherwise. Nobody would say, no, we don't think targeted subsidy is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do it. Nobody knows how to do it
Correct.
or do it well.
Correct.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really a tricky one, I feel.
Okay.
It's not just about the budget. I think it's the whole.
Dr. Muhammad Khalid, the author of The Colour of Inequality, he's talking about how direct cash aid to the B40s can actually reinvigorate the economy and keep the money circulated domestically. He argues that any form of savings to the T20 specifically will lead to capital outflow to some degree. Yalah, balik kampung London kan. And we're looking at all this situation where there's a lot of upside in terms of us giving direct cash aid to the B40s particularly. Right. Having said that, B40 and M40 and T20 classification also has its own issues. Yes. But regardless, do you feel that that whole idea of direct cash aid might be seen in some shape or form in this budget presentation tomorrow?
Yes.
I mean, I know you're guessing,
yes.
But yes.
Yes. I have a feeling that it will. I don't know in what shape or form and what quantum we're looking at.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think it will happen. But coming back to your point earlier, I think the direct cash aid is actually just a portion of the whole value chain, right? Yeah. So, an example, if I receive a direct cash aid, then I bought consumer goods from China. And this is the matter of export and imports, right? Not necessarily helping the Malaysian local businesses, but also it's actually, to a certain extent, it's an outflow.
But you would still classify that as capital outflow?
Yeah. So
however small the capital is,
correct.
Like this phone cover.
Yeah. So I wouldn't take that direct cash aid as a myopic view, saying yes, it actually would help the economy, but fundamentally, I think it needs to be there because the livelihood, because the pressure of cost of living, inflation and stuff like that, right? But like I said, it's a really tricky one this year.
Let's move on to inflationary pressures, but of course, rising interest rates. A lot of central banks are indeed easing up on the tightening of their monetary policies. We're looking at the Fed raising their interest rates yet again, but a lot of economists, consensus-wise, are arguing that this is nearer to the end of the rate hike cycle. Domestically in Malaysia, we saw a rather surprise move by Bank Negara of not raising the interest rate back in January, maintaining at 2.75%, at OPR. Some of the economists are rather confident, saying that another 25 bips hike is inevitable. Looks like inevitable didn't come to pass. But there is still the whole conversation of if another interest rate hike is going to be done for the next MPC meeting, May, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong. But generally speaking, there could be another 25 basis points hike in tandem with the US Fed. But of course, inflation is easing up in key markets, especially in the US. But in developed markets like the UK, it's still well into the double digits. China inflationary pressures are being suppressed artificially, one would argue, because of the high subsidies that is currently being implemented there. In this region, we're looking at Malaysia inflation headline at about 3.0, easing up from 3.3 last year. But there are some caveats when we look at, say, for instance, World Bank estimates saying that the 2.5 to 3.0 is possible, but there's a lot of externality factors, including geopolitical pressures coming from Ukraine and Russia, postulations of China in Taiwan, many lah, there are banyak asterisks. That is giving a whole lot of uncertainty when it comes to risk premiums. Having said that, Malaysian political risk, I would argue, has abated quite a bit. We're looking at this Malaysia Madani moving ahead. We're looking at this cobbled together government, seems to be working well and seems to be chugging along just fine. The externality threats of destabilizing the government, i.e. Perikatan Nasional, seems to be mitigated. All this seems to be, we're looking at perception. Do you feel that the risk profile of the global economic status is actually rising, but domestically it's currently being mitigated to some degree?
Yeah, you're right. So the signals, I think a layman person like me would actually look at is actually a reference to the...
Not layman, but yes, go on.
Still layman. I'm no expert, by the way, but just sharing some views. Is the Western market, because they would hit the first, then it will come trickle here. And having said that, I agree with what you mentioned, right? So I remain cautiously optimistic in the sense of, yes, you're right, the signals, the positive signals are there, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's about control measures with regards to the economy. So it's been good. So it's almost like Eric Ten Hag and Manchester United. I have to put in there that I'm a Manchester United fan. I know you're not.
I'm having a problem with my own Chelsea issues, and Lokman, my colleague, is also having this whole Liverpool issue.
But
FSG.
So if you're a Manchester United fan, you could resonate with the Malaysian
after
economy.
years of anguish. I get that bit. But do you feel that the situation is going to change for the better or for the? What's the outlook for your from your view?
So I wouldn't deny. I think it's a practical move when you say about MPC in May, whereby they're probably a slightly more prudent or conservative actions or mitigations, whether it's a rise of interest just to counter-measure the inflation, just to reduce domestic spending, and also not to increase the price as high. So I feel it's, back to your question, I feel that we're kind of in a good place. I think our government, for the short term that they have been managing it quite okay, and we see the signals. And then the Prime Minister was very clear in terms of where he wants Malaysia to head, and it's quite positive at the moment. So that's why I say I'm consciously optimistic. We don't know what's going to happen for the next 3-6 months, but I think where things are going, it looks quite positive.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody says that they know how things the near term is going to pan out, that person is definitely lying. Okay, let's talk about the budget specific. There are some ministries that I am looking attentively at. Just yesterday, the Health Minister, Dr. Zaliha, had a town hall talking about contract workers, talking about the procurement processes, talking about CAPEX and DevEx versus OPEX in terms of the Health Ministry. That's one ministry that I'm looking at. There's also another ministry, which is, of course, the Communications and Digital Ministry. 5G rollout has always been the big thorn in how Malaysia moves ahead with network and connectivity. I'm going to MWC Barcelona next week. I'm going to be speaking to some people when it comes to 5G connectivity there on Malaysia. Please forgive me. I know I can talk about Malaysia in Malaysia, but let's talk about Malaysia in Barcelona, kasi international flavor sikit. There's also that whole notion of the PMO specific, because we're looking at SPA, Suruhanjaya Perkhidmatan Awam, with 1.8 million. And the defined contribution and defined benefit management of how we're looking at 1.8 million current civil service and how that is going to pan out to co-op and, of course, pension funds moving forward. And the MITI specific, because what Titi Wangsa MP raised, Datuk Johari Ghani, raised in the parliament was actually quite interesting. He says that, when a foreign direct investment comes in, everything is signed, we announce. The number of direct FDIs. But then, there's no audit of it, there's no translation of it in terms of how much materialized. More importantly, because Datuk Jo is an accountant, so am I, he's like, how much outflow? Then we can reconcile. Otherwise, we're just talking, rubbish, quite frankly, So these are the ministries that I am looking forward to when it comes to this budget and how it's going to pan out. What about you? What will be some of the ministries that you're looking at?
I think barring what you said just now, I think those are key ministries that you're looking at, like trade, MITI and stuff like that, right? Digital, it's big, right? I think Prime Minister also have mentioned about digitalization, supporting MSMEs through digitalization. I would foresee that also would be the case. But also I'm looking into specifics of the social delivery goods and services. And we've mentioned earlier about cash aid. This is not necessarily cash aid, but incentives around the social sector. I feel that's a strong play as well, especially with the Malaysia Madani holistic approach, whole society approach. And also just to give that safety net that we've talked earlier to those who might not have that access, right? So I think ministries who are into either KPKT, KPWKM and stuff like that would have a major, I wouldn't say budget, but major role to play in terms of ensuring resiliencies for the bigger mass of the rakyat.
I think, so you're pretty much consistent with our guest just now, Hafiz of Bauer Group, when he was talking to Harits at Pasar Borong Selayang. He argues then, when we started the show at 9 o'clock just now, he argues that the Agriculture Ministry is going to be a key factor here, not because of the production of food per se, but just in general food security. So do you feel that that is one of the key factors here as well?
Yeah, so things that not necessarily directly translate into KPI or dollars and cents matrix. I think that will be key, right? You spoke about food security. We probably talk about employability or youth employability, access to employability generally, not just the urban populations, for example, women into entrepreneurship, rural entrepreneurship, and stuff like that, right? So these are the factors that might not be directly attributable to the budgets, but we feel that there will be some form, one way or another, that this support will be catered for this group through the ministries or relevant agencies or ministries.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Ethis Ventures then, because as a business owner, particularly one in the financial sector, and of course one that looks at capital management, where are you going to direct your company moving ahead for this year? I'm not sure if this is going to be a good year for you, but it's going to be one of those tough ones.
Yeah, the market signals is going to be very tricky. Probably it's going to be harder than last year. And just take tech entrepreneurs in general, right? You've seen mass layouts. Big tech companies, we talk about things around Google, Microsoft, and stuff like that. Even recently, the Big Four, McKinsey also have announced mass layouts and stuff like that. Layoffs.
We're looking at low teens in percentage in contrast to the total workforce that they have.
Correct. But it's still thousands in that sense, right?
Thousands is one thing, but when you look at downsizing your staff strength from X amount and cutting it down to 10, 15, 20%, that is sizable. It's very sizable. However, thousands it translates to is one thing, but downsizing by 50% for us is a big thing.
And then these are the ones who have high valuations and stuff like that, right?
Not just that, high revenue as well.
High revenues as well, And then we're talking about Malaysia. I think it's slightly more smaller market, but also we see similar signals, right? When people revise their forecasts, their revenue projections and stuff like that, which also indicates that the business or the environment is not as thriving as before. So that's one. Secondly, with regards to investors, I think the propensity to invest is still there. The appetite is still there, but now investors have more, nitpicking in terms of who they would invest, what they will invest, and what domain. Generally, what we see now, a lot of investors or retail investors, small investors, not necessarily VCs and PEs, they also probably have done so, is actually to invest in the sustainable businesses. So not necessarily
sustainable business in the context of ESG or sustainable businesses that can create revenue over time?
Both. Okay. One is actually not necessarily they look for high growth 10x, 15x, 20x. Probably the case for 2-3 years ago. But now they're looking for business who have robust and resiliency to go through the
economic cycles that may come.
But also like you've mentioned about the ESG stuff, right? So they no longer just look for profit per se, but they say, okay, this business, is there any impact to the environment, economy, and stuff like that? That's a new lens, I think, not necessarily new, but new emphasis that will put into investment considerations.
New emphasis moving forward. Okay. Final question to you. What is the one thing that you want in the budget?
One thing.
Yang you nak betul-betul.
I think for me, it's almost like a catalyzing
Let's hear the T5 speak right now, man. Yes, what is it? Low income tax?
Well, I guess that, but also things around that catalyzing, things that probably that we don't foresee will happen. So, for example, investment, foreign investment, right? If there's more co-match funding, incentives that government could also, I wouldn't say resuscitate, but also try to accelerate growth in that area. That is something that potentially a lot of businesses might look at. That's one. But secondly, you've mentioned about tax and I wouldn't say cash out or cash aid per se, but things or goodies that actually help in the longevity of Malaysians lah.
Okay.
So that would be interesting. I don't know how, I don't know what, but that would be good.
And there you go. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know what. In fact, he's not lying. Many of us don't know how or what. We're going to be bringing the live coverage of the Budget 2023 presentation that's going to be announced by the Finance Minister / Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim at the Parliament tomorrow, 24th February at 3 p.m. We're going to be doing a live coverage from 2:30 onwards, or 3, all the way until 7:30 p.m. That is a show that is going to be presented by my colleagues, Najib Aruf, as well as Harits. I'll also be joining them because I don't have the stamina like they do to sit at the desk for 4 hours. So I'll be jumping about in front of the touch screen and I'm showing you some of the important and relevant data that is pertinent to the conversation that's going to take place tomorrow during the budget presentation. Throughout the evening, we're also going to be discussing at length with a few economists as well as analysts and experts on the matter on all the properties that we have, including that of Agenda Awani. Consider this as well as my own show, and of course we are looking at feedback from you to give your views and give your ideas into what is most important for you, especially when it comes to the budget presentation tomorrow. In the meantime, do stay on with us on Astro Awani. This is me signing off on behalf of my colleague Haris Ashraf Hasnan, as well as our producers Nina Rosman, Nabila, our cameraman Kai, and of course our executive producer Najib Aruf from the studio. I am Ibrahim Sani, taking a very short break from this as we continue to discuss about Eric Ten Hag and how he is benefactor reaping the dividends of the squabbles or the quagmire of the Premier League. My name is Ibrahim Sani. See you again.